This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Israeli warplanes hammered the Gaza Strip neighborhood by neighborhood on Tuesday, reducing buildings to rubble and sending people scrambling to find safety in the tiny, sealed-off territory, now suffering severe retaliation for the deadly weekend attack by Hamas militants. Aid groups warn that supplies were running out at hospitals, overwhelmed by the wounded. The war has already claimed more than 1,800 lives on both sides. Israeli soldiers went house to house on Tuesday to take away bodies in one of the areas hardest hit when Hamas militants attacked Israel on Saturday. Reuters correspondent Sean Hogan reports.
Reuters and foreign media were given a tour by the Israeli Defense Forces. Major General Itai Verov describes what they found once they had control.
You see the babies, the mother, the fathers in the bedrooms, in the protection rooms, and how the terrorists kill them. It's not a war. It's not a battlefield. It's a massacre. It's a terror activity. So you can look it on yourself. It's something that I never saw in my life.
Bodies of villagers and gunmen lie scattered throughout the neighborhood, with houses and vehicles destroyed.
Reuters correspondent Sean Hogan. Israel has the right to defend itself, but some of its decisions would breach international law. European Union Foreign Policy Chief Josep Borrell told reporters on Tuesday. In response to the attack on Israel by Palestinian militant group Hamas, Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said on Monday no electricity, food, water, or fuel would be allowed into Gaza.
Israel has the right to defend, but it has to be done accordingly with international law.
This is VOA News. On October 15th, Polish voters go to the polls. One of two main political forces, the Law and Justice Party or the Civic Coalition, will likely have to form a coalition to govern Poland, the largest post-communist EU and NATO member and a critical supporter of Ukraine in its defense against Russia's invasion. Miroslava Gangadze reports from Warsaw.
Candidates from all political parties are actively campaigning to rally supporters. Among them is Adam Bodnar, a human rights lawyer and former Polish ombudsman.
They are basically about the future of Poland. Okay, either we are a democratic country or we are going further into some kind of authoritarian direction.
Another significant factor in this election is Poland's aging population. Its 10 million pensioners make up about 1/4 of the population. It's also the ruling Law and Justice Party's main electorate. Miroslava Gongadze, VOA News, Warsaw, Poland.
Russia accused the United States on Tuesday of carrying out preparations at its nuclear test site in the state of Nevada, but said that Moscow would not restart its own nuclear testing program unless Washington did. Russia's deputy foreign minister made the charge as its lower house of parliament urgently studies how to revoke Moscow's ratification of a landmark treaty banning nuclear tests, and as tensions with the West are at their highest level since the 1962 Cuban Missile Crisis. A U.S. State Department spokesperson rejected the allegation. Former U.S. President Donald Trump acknowledged in a document now evidence in his fraud trial the size of his Trump Tower penthouse was a lot less than he later claimed. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
Evidence shown at Donald Trump's New York civil fraud trial shows that he signed a 1994 document giving the true size of his Trump Tower penthouse at just under 11,000 square feet. It was listed later as 30,000 square feet on his financial statements that were given to banks, insurers, and others to make deals and secure loans. The evidence appeared in an email attachment shown during testimony from Alan Weisselberg, the former finance chief of Trump's company. The state attorney general's lawsuit alleges that Weisselberg engineered Trump's financial statements to meet his demands. Trump denies any wrongdoing. Julie Walker, New York.
Two balloon pilots from Poland who were competing in the prestigious Gordon Bennett Cup long-distance race were recovering Tuesday from burns, broken bones, and other injuries after their hydrogen-filled balloon struck a high-voltage power line over the U.S. state of Texas and exploded before falling to the ground. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA. This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Israel's exchange of rocket fire with Hamas continued Wednesday at night as tanks massed around the densely populated Palestinian enclave, and Hamas militants said they were still fighting on Israeli territory following their shock weekend incursion. Israel's Iron Dome missile defense system could be seen intercepting rockets fired from Gaza on Wednesday evening. Israel's death toll rose to 1,200 with over 2,700 wounded, its military said, from Hamas militants' hours-long rampage after breaching the fence enclosing Gaza on Saturday. The death toll in both Israel and the Gaza Strip increased on Wednesday as fighting continued there. Linda Gradstein reports for VOA from Jerusalem.
By early Wednesday, Israel said it had carried out airstrikes on more than 2,600 targets in Gaza, fueling accusations of Israeli atrocities against Palestinian civilians. Many in Gaza warn of a growing humanitarian crisis. Israel has cut off electricity and water to the enclave, and the power plant there is due to stop supplying electricity on Wednesday. Hundreds of thousands of Palestinians have fled their homes fearing Israeli attacks and have been sheltering in schools and other facilities. Linda Gradstein for VOA News, Jerusalem.
U.S. President Joe Biden reaffirmed his quote-unquote unshakable support for Israel after the surprise attack by Hamas as he prepared to address U.S. Jewish community leaders on Wednesday. Biden said he had spoken to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu for a fourth time since Saturday's assault. Biden said Israel had a duty to respond to the sheer evil of the attacks. This is VOA News. Just days after a series of deadly earthquakes rattled Afghanistan's western province of Herat, another powerful tremor struck the same area on Wednesday, destroying hundreds more homes and sending survivors running for their lives yet again. Reuters correspondent Olivia Zelina has more.
The Taliban-run government said more than 2,400 people were killed and over 2,000 injured in Saturday's tremors, one of the deadliest in the world so far this year. The World Health Organization said women and children make up the majority of the victims. On Tuesday, Red Crescent Society workers said many of the people coming in didn't have proper food or clean drinking water. Relief and rescue efforts have so far been hampered by crumbling infrastructure and a lack of foreign aid, which has dried up since the Taliban took over the country. The European Union, United Nations, and several countries have pledged to send donations and relief packages.
Reuters correspondent Olivia Zelino. Republicans in the U.S. House of Representatives have nominated Representative Steve Scalise to be the next House Speaker. Now they must try to unite their deeply divided majority to elect the conservative in a floor vote after ousting Representative Kevin McCarthy from the job. Hurricane Lydia made landfall as an extremely dangerous Category 4 storm Tuesday evening with winds of 225 kilometers per hour near Mexico's Pacific coast of Puerto Vallarta and then moved inland, still as a powerful hurricane. VOA's Kim Lewis has more.
The U.S. National Hurricane Center said Lydia's eye appeared to have reached land near Las Penitas in the western state of Jalisco. The area is a sparsely populated peninsula. Osvaldo Martinez, Operations Director for Jalisco State Civil Protection, explains they are alerting the population, evacuating communities, and setting up shelters for people. The hurricane moved south of Puerto Vallarta to a point inland about 30 miles east of the resort and about 90 miles west of the capital of Jalisco State, Guadalajara. Kim Lewis, VOA News.
Vote counting was underway in Liberia on Wednesday, a day after citizens voted on whether to re-elect football legend George Weah, who is running for a second term as president. Liberians enthusiastically turned out in large numbers on Tuesday to choose their president, as well as 73 representatives from the legislature's lower chamber and 15 senators. Some 2.4 million people were registered to vote. I'm Joe Ramsey, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. Israel has formed a unity government despite political divisions. VOA correspondent Henry Ridgewell reports.
In the wake of the Hamas attack, Israeli politicians, riven by bitter internal divisions, have formed a unity government. That may give pause to the country's foes, says former U.S. Middle East envoy Dennis Ross.
I don't rule out the possibility there'll be an all-out war, although Hezbollah was counting on divisions in Israel, and I think they've seen what they were thinking about Israel in terms of divisions is no longer the case.
Israel could seek to expand its strikes against Iran's allies and proxies beyond Gaza.
There's always the potential for Israel to strike elsewhere, of course, not just Lebanon, which would invoke a third Lebanon war, but potentially the widening of what is already underway between Israel and Iran indirectly.
But Israel is unlikely to attack Iran directly, says analyst Lina Khatib.
Because this would already stretch resources that this war have shown to be stretched.
Henry Ridgewell, VOA News, London.
The chief of NATO says the alliance will hold a major nuclear exercise this week. The announcement by Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg came after Russia warned it would pull out of a global nuclear test ban agreement. NATO's, quote, Steadfast Noon exercise is held annually and involves fighter jets capable of carrying nuclear warheads, but no live bombs are used. Stoltenberg said Thursday, quote, this is a routine training event that happens every October. The exercise is scheduled to run from Monday, October 26th, and will take place over Italy, Croatia, and the Mediterranean Sea. It will involve 13 NATO allies and a mix of aircraft types, including advanced fighter jets and U.S. B-52 bombers. You'll find expanded coverage of world news and events at our website, voanews.com, 24 hours a day. This is VOA News. U.S. Senator Bob Menendez is facing another indictment. AP correspondent Shelley Adler reports.
Federal prosecutors in New York City have rewritten their indictment against Senator Bob Menendez and his wife to charge them with conspiring to have him act as an agent of Egypt and Egyptian officials. The superseding indictment, which was filed in Manhattan federal court, says the conspiracy occurred from January 2018 to June of 2022. The new charge comes just weeks after the New Jersey Democrat and his wife were accused of accepting bribes from 3 New Jersey businessmen who wanted the senator's help and influence over foreign affairs. The couple has pleaded not guilty. I'm Shelley Adler.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken has vowed U.S. support for Israel as Israeli strikes continue to pound Gaza. AP correspondent Karen Shamus has more.
Gaza's skyline was filled with plumes of smoke rising to meet the clouds as new Israeli strikes continued into the daytime. One building demolished by an Israeli missile left residents scrambling to lift the twisted metal and concrete in hope of finding survivors. Hospitals were overloaded with injured, some wailing in pain as they were wheeled in on stretchers as the missiles rained overhead. International aid groups have warned of a worsening humanitarian crisis after Israel halted deliveries of food, water, fuel and electricity to Gaza's 2.3 million people. I'm Karen Shamas.
The Israel-Palestinian war rolled into a 6th day of fighting since Hamas launched its attack. Rick Pantaleo tells us about possible escalations in hostilities.
The Israeli military is preparing for a possible ground operation in Gaza, but political leadership has not decided on one. Hamas, meanwhile, said it is seeking to end Palestinians' suffering, which they say has become intolerable under unending Israeli military occupation in the West Bank and a 16-year-long blockade in Gaza. In an interview after meeting with victims of a Hamas attack in Israel, British Foreign Secretary James Cleverly says Hamas does not represent all Palestinians.
Of course, it's really important that we recognise that Hamas, a terrorist organisation, does not speak on behalf of the Palestinian people as a whole, or indeed the Arab people within the region that have perpetrated atrocities both in southern Israel and, of course, with the kidnapped people that they've taken into Gaza.
Rick Pantaleo, VOA News.
The European Commission has made a formal, legally binding request for information from Elon Musk's social media platform X over its handling of hate speech, misinformation, and violent terrorist content related to the Israeli-Hamas war. It's the first step in what could become the EU's inaugural investigation under the Digital Services Act. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. U.S. Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin was in Israel on Friday. VOA's Rick Pantaleo has more on his visit.
Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin assured leaders in Israel that the U.S. has their back. At a joint news conference with his Israeli counterpart, Secretary of Defense Austin says Hamas attacked Israel at a time of global challenge as the war in Ukraine blazes on.
And we remain fully able to project power and uphold our commitments and direct resources to multiple theaters. So we will stand with Israel even as we stand with Ukraine. The United States can walk and chew gum at the same time.
Rick Pantaleo, VOA News.
Politicians, diplomats, and religious leaders gathered in Washington, D.C. on Friday at Freedom Plaza near the White House at a rally organized by the Jewish Community Relations Council. Among those at the rally, Eliav Benjamin, deputy chief of mission at the Embassy of Israel in Washington, D.C., said Hamas does not represent the aspirations of the Palestinian people.
Hamas terrorists are not freedom fighters who represent the aspirations of the Palestinian people. Rather, their fundamental goal has always been very clear: to destroy the state of Israel and to annihilate and murder Jews.
Israeli infantry made their first raids into the Gaza Strip on Friday since Hamas fighters rampaged through southern Israel, killing many civilians, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said a campaign of retaliation had only just begun. An Israeli shell has landed in a gathering of international journalists covering clashes on the border in South Lebanon, killing a Reuters videographer and leaving 6 other journalists injured. An Associated Press photographer at the scene saw the body of the dead journalist and the 6 who were wounded. For additional stories 24 hours a day, visit our website, voanews.com. This is VOA News. Iran's foreign minister is warning that if Israel's attacks on the Gaza Strip don't stop immediately, the violence could spread to other parts of the Middle East. He was speaking in Beirut Friday during a tour that also took him to Baghdad. Later in the day, he's scheduled to travel to the Syrian capital, Damascus. Iran heads the so-called axis of resistance that includes powerful militant groups in the region, such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and the Popular Mobilization Forces in Iraq. There have been concerns that the war could spread to Lebanon's border, where Hezbollah fighters have been on alert following Hamas attacks on southern Israel. U.S. President Joe Biden has warned other players in the Middle East not to join the conflict, sending American warships to the region and vowing full support of Israel. The White House says Russia is getting North Korean help for its war in Ukraine. AP Washington correspondent Sagar Meghani reports.
National Security Council spokesman John Kirby says North Korea has delivered more than 1,000 containers of military equipment and munitions to Russia,
which we use to attack Ukrainian cities, kill Ukrainian civilians.
In return, Kirby says North Korea appears to be seeking help for its nuclear program,
including fighter aircraft, surface-to-air missiles, armored vehicles, ballistic missile production equipment, or other materials and other advanced technologies.
Speculation about North Korean plans to help boost Russian munition supply soared last month when Kim Jong-un visited Vladimir Putin. Sagar Meghani at the Pentagon.
Nobel Prize-winning poet Louise Gluck has died, her editor says. She was 80. The AP's Ed Donahue reports.
Gluck won the Nobel Prize in Literature in 2020.
For her unmistakable poetic voice that with austere beauty makes individual existence universal.
Gluck was the first American to take the Literature Prize since T.S. Eliot in 1948. Her reaction at the time?
Agitation. Joy, gratitude.
Louise Gluck's poetry dealt with trauma, disillusion, and longing, with moments of ecstasy and contentment. The poet also was a professor. Students would remember her as demanding and inspiring, not above making someone cry, but also valued for guiding young people to search for their own voices. I'm Ed Donahue.
Next week, the U.S. military plans to begin draining fuel from World War II-era underground fuel tanks in Hawaii. Work to drain the 104 million gallons remaining in the tanks is scheduled to begin on Monday. The operation comes nearly 2 years after the facility sickened 6,000 people when it leaked jet fuel into a Pearl Harbor drinking water well. Removing the fuel is a key step toward shutting down the Red Hill bulk fuel storage facility as demanded by the state of Hawaii. The November 2021 spill poisoned the Navy's water system, serving 93,000 people in and around Joint Base Pearl Harbor Hickman. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News. This is VOA News. I'm Alexis Strope. As tensions escalate, U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken continued his diplomatic push through the region to prevent the violence from spreading. VOA's senior diplomatic correspondent Cindy Sain.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken met with Saudi and United Arab Emirates leaders Saturday and reached out by phone to his Chinese counterpart to try to prevent the fighting between Israel and Hamas from erupting into a wider war in the Middle East. Blinken is expected to head to Egypt on Sunday, where the fate of some 2 million civilians in Gaza will be high on the agenda. Cindy Sain, VOA News.
Far from Israel, Jews grieve and pray for peace in the first Shabbat services since the Hamas attack. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
At Temple Adass, Israel, an armed guard stands by for Friday night Shabbat service. A police car outside and every seat inside taken. The congregation sings the Israeli national anthem. Rabbi Dan Geffen addresses them, his heart breaking along with his voice.
I don't think that I have been as filled with rage as I have been in the last week.
As a pacifist, he prays for peace with his followers, but tells them now is the time to stand united with Israel.
There is such a thing as righteous anger. There is such a thing as evil in this world. There is a time in which it must be fought.
A lot of prayers, tears, and hugs at this service in Sag Harbor, New York. I'm Julie Walker.
Iran's foreign minister has called on Israel to stop its attacks on Gaza, warning that the war might expand to other parts of the Middle East if Hezbollah joins the battle. He told reporters in Beirut that Lebanon's Hezbollah group has taken all the scenarios of war into consideration. Israel considers Hezbollah its most serious immediate threat. For additional stories 24 hours a day, visit voanews.com. This is VOA News. The Israeli army said Saturday it was investigating an incident in southern Lebanon in which Reuters journalist Issam Abdallah was killed and 6 others injured Friday when missiles fired from the direction of Israel struck them. Reuters correspondent Olivia Chan reports.
A military spokesman said the death of Issam Abdallah was, quote, a tragic thing. A Reuters videographer who was at the scene on Friday said missiles fired from the direction of Israel struck the group, alongside journalists from Al Jazeera and AFP. The Reuters team was providing a live video signal for broadcasters near Alma al-Shab, close to the Israel border, where the Israeli military and Lebanese militia Hezbollah have been trading fire in border clashes. While other news outlets, including the Associated Press and Al Jazeera, said the missiles which killed Issam Abdallah were Israeli, Reuters could not establish whether they were fired by Israel.
Israel's military on Saturday accused Hamas of preventing civilians from leaving northern Gaza as it prepares for an all-out ground assault on the Palestinian territory.
Hamas is trying to block the roads. He's calling my calls fake. He says we're faking. He says stay put. He wants this human shield.
Israel has vowed to annihilate the Hamas militant group that controls Gaza in retaliation for a rampage by its fighters who stormed through Israeli towns a week ago, killing 1,300 people in the worst attack on civilians in Israel's history. On Friday, the Israeli military told the population of the northern half of the Gaza Strip, which includes the enclave's biggest settlement, Gaza City, to move south immediately. Israelis' calls for an evacuation of Gaza have been greeted with concern by humanitarian organizations and even some supporters. VOA's Jeff Custer reports.
UN Secretary General Anthony Guterres and World Health Organization Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus have called on Israel to reconsider its decision to evacuate 1.1 million people from Gaza, saying without food, water, or accommodations, it will create a humanitarian crisis. The European Union's foreign policy chief Josep Borrell echoed those sentiments Saturday. Speaking to reporters as he wrapped up a visit to China, Borrell urged Israel to give the people in Gaza more time, saying moving 1 million people in 24 hours is just impossible.
We certainly defend the right of Israel to defend itself against the attack that has been suffering, but as any right, it has a limit. And this limit is international law and international humanitarian law.
Jeff Custer, VOA News.
Various Guatemalan government web pages have been disabled after hackers launched a cyber attack early Saturday. The hackers, affiliated with the activist group Anonymous, said they are working in support of indigenous pro-democracy protesters. Guatemalan authorities say the hacking is a matter of national security, and they are responding. I'm Alexis Strope, VOA News.
This is VOA News. I'm Joe Ramsey. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed on Sunday to demolish Hamas as his troops prepared to move into the Gaza Strip in pursuit of Hamas militants whose deadly rampage through Israeli border towns shocked the world. Israel is carrying out the most intense bombardment Gaza has ever seen in response to the killing of 1,300 people when Hamas fighters rampaged through Israeli towns on October 7th. Authorities in Gaza said at least 2,670 people had been killed so far by Israel's retaliatory strikes, a quarter of them children, and nearly 10,000 wounded. Cross-border fighting between Israel and the Lebanese militant group Hezbollah is intensifying, AP correspondent Mimi Montgomery reports.
An Israeli rescue service confirms the killing of at least one person on the Israeli side of the border with Lebanon following cross-border fire involving shelling. There are reports of several others wounded on both sides. Hezbollah, an ally of Gaza's Hamas rulers, says its attack on the northern town of Shtula comes in retaliation for Israel recently killing a Reuters video journalist and other civilians. As Israel wages war against Hamas over last week's unprecedented attack, there's concern that Hezbollah could enter the war as well. But a Hezbollah spokesperson says the recent intensity in fighting does not indicate the group will fully enter into the war. I'm Mimi Montgomery.
U.S. Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer said on Sunday the Senate would push through a military aid package to help Israel in its war against the Palestinian Islamist group Hamas.
I, along with my colleagues here, will lead the effort in the United States Senate to provide Israel with the support required to fully defend itself from this monstrous attack.
This is VOA News. Another 6.3 magnitude earthquake struck Afghanistan, killing a handful of people and injuring scores more. This latest disaster follows a pair of equally strong earthquakes and aftershocks that killed thousands recently. VOA's Arash Arabasadi has more.
Afghans are once again bringing their injured to hospitals as the country suffers its third magnitude 6.3 earthquake in just over a week. The U.S. Geological Survey says the quake's epicenter was about 34 kilometers outside the provincial capital, Herat. Authorities report a handful of people dead and at least 150 injured, according to the head of the emergency relief team, who cautioned those numbers may rise as rescuers reach more affected areas. Arash Arabasadi, VOA News.
A victorious Azerbaijan president, Ilham Aliyev, said he would achieve a decades-long Azerbaijani dream by retaking Nagorno-Karabakh from ethnic Armenian separatists as he raised his country's flag in the region's main city on Sunday. Dressed in military attire, the longtime leader flew the blue, red, green flag, cementing Baku's conquest after last month's lightning offensive. The 24-hour military operation in September led to the exodus of nearly all ethnic Armenians from Karabakh. It was the first time Aliyev had set foot in the city since it fell to ethnic Armenian separatists in the 1990s. U.S. President Joe Biden and the Democratic National Committee report raising more than $71 million from July through September for his 2024 presidential race. AP correspondent Julie Walker reports.
The funds are a strong indication that party donors remain united behind President Biden going into a 2024 race that may feature a rematch with Donald Trump. His campaign announced last week that it raised more than $45.5 million for the 3 months ending September 30th, without the benefit of the national GOP or party entities. Biden's campaign and Democrats previously said they'd raised slightly more than $72 million in the 10 weeks between his official re-election announcement and the end of the second quarter. I'm Julie Walker.
More than 2 months after a Hawaiian wildfire killed at least 98 people on Maui, the 3 surviving public schools are set to reopen Monday. Traumatized families are facing an emotional crossroads in deciding whether to send their children back or have them remain at other schools that took them in. Some parents said they worried the fire left toxins behind, despite assurances from education officials the campuses are safe. I'm Joe Ramsey.